"Why is he crying?" someone whispered as the boy sat down at the piano, his hands shaking. No one in the packed auditorium knew what had happened just hours earlier. Liam had buried his father that morning, an army hero, a music teacher, and his best friend. But he showed up to the school talent show anyway. What came next wasn't a performance. It was a soul-shaking goodbye, a raw, trembling eulogy in music. And when the truth came out, the world stood still. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now let's get back to the story. "Is he crying already?" someone whispered in the second row, just loud enough to stir a ripple through the darkened auditorium. The boy stood frozen beneath the spotlight, the edges of his blazer slightly too big, his black dress shoes dull and muddy from the walk across the parking lot. His eyes, red-rimmed and distant, glistened under the overhead light, catching its glow like wet glass. The stage curtain had barely closed behind the last act, yet the room had gone unusually still. He didn't speak. He didn't wave to the crowd. He just stood in front of the grand piano, like it had been dropped from another world into this one. His world on the worst possible day. His name was Liam. A single microphone squealed with feedback and cut off. A cough echoed, then silence again. A dense kind of silence. The kind that feels like something is about to happen, but hasn't yet. A pause the universe holds its breath through. Liam blinked once, then took slow mechanical steps toward the bench. The heels of his shoes tapped hollowly against the wooden stage. Tap, 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 each one like a drop in a still pond. He sat, adjusted the stool like his father had always taught him, hands flat on his thighs, spine tall, head down, but his fingers just hovered. Somewhere near the back, a teacher leaned toward another and whispered, "Do we need to stop him? Something's wrong." "No," came the soft reply. "Let him be." Liam reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small photo folded into thirds. Creased, worn, and stained by fingerprints and tears. He unfolded it once, then again, and placed it gently on the piano just above the keys. A man smiled back from the photo, dressed in army fatigues, one hand resting on Liam's shoulder, the other on a music book open between them. Nobody else could see the photo, but Liam didn't care. The boy wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket. Then he played. Not a flourish, not a scale. No fireworks or fancy openings, just a single trembling note, soft, vulnerable, as if he were asking permission to be there at all. The judges glanced at one another. One scribbled something, another just stared. The MC off stage took a step forward, uncertain whether to signal a stage crew member to intervene. But he didn't. He couldn't, because after the second note came a third, then a fourth. Then a haunting progression that seemed to fill not just the air, but every breath in the room. The song wasn't on any list. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't expected. It was his father's song. The same one he had heard as a baby, played from the corner of their small apartment while spaghetti boiled in the kitchen and the dog barked in the hallway. The song his dad used to play with a chuckle, with a cigarette half lit on the windowsill and a beer on the floor beside him. The melody that had no name, only memory. And now, sorrow. Each note pressed out of Liam's fingers like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His hands trembled but never missed. His left hand stumbled once, just once, on a transition, but he caught himself like someone catching their breath after tripping over grief. A tear splashed onto the ivory key. He didn't even wipe it away. He let it stay. In the second row, a woman gasped softly. That morning, just hours earlier, she had stood 3 pews behind Liam in the tiny chapel on Pine Street where the funeral had taken place. No one at the school had known. Not the principal, not his classmates, not the judges sitting now with softened eyes and crumpled score sheets. But she had seen the boy in a black suit, hands clenched into fists, refusing to cry while the priest spoke of sacrifice and honor. She had watched his mother collapse into sobs when they folded the flag and placed it in her hands. Liam never looked away from the casket. Not once. And now here he was, sitting in the middle of a school talent show while paper stars dangled from the ceiling and banners with glittering letters read, "Tonight's Rising Stars." Except Liam wasn't rising. He was sinking slowly, beautifully into something deeper than anyone had expected, something no talent show trophy could ever acknowledge. Each note curled through the room like smoke from a candle just blown out. Off stage, behind the curtains, the drama teacher placed a hand over her chest. Her script had fallen to the floor. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's saying goodbye." But still Liam said nothing. His hands did all the speaking, the keys all the weeping. The final progression came too soon. A swell, a hush, a long soft pause held on the pedal. Then silence. He kept his foot pressed, letting the last sound ring out into the void. His shoulders were trembling now. He bowed his head, his hands fell into his lap, and he sat there, motionless. No one clapped, not because it wasn't magnificent, but because no one wanted to break the moment. It felt sacred. Finally, a small sound. A sniffle from someone in the back row. Then another. Then a slow rise of breath from the crowd, as though everyone had been underwater for the last 3 minutes and just now remembered how to breathe. Liam stood clumsily. His legs almost gave under him. He grabbed the photo, folded it gently, and put it back in his pocket. Still no bow. No glance at the audience. No acknowledgement of the judges. He simply turned and walked off stage. Behind the curtain, a stagehand tried to speak. "Hey, that was..." But the boy walked past without a word, disappearing into the hallway, the echo of his steps fading like the final notes of his song. And just like that, the next act was announced. A magician, 7th grade, dressed in a too shiny tux. No one paid attention, because somewhere deep in the heart of every person in that auditorium, a truth had been carved without explanation. That boy hadn't come to win. He came to remember. He came to honor. He came to play the final song his father would ever hear. And though the man was buried beneath 6 feet of earth just miles away, for those 3 minutes, he was there. The sky hadn't even brightened yet. Outside the bedroom window, the world was still painted in deep shades of indigo and ash. The kind of silence before dawn that made everything feel suspended, like time itself had taken a breath and didn't know how to exhale. Liam sat at the edge of his bed, fully dressed in black slacks and a white shirt that pinched at his collar. His tie hung loose around his neck, his fingers fumbling with the knot the way they always did when his dad wasn't there to fix it for him. He tried once, failed, tried again, still wrong. A sound from the hallway, soft footsteps, made him stop. His mother stood there, leaning against the frame like it was holding her up. Her dress was simple dark blue, sleeveless, despite the cold. Her makeup was smeared under her eyes, even though she hadn't cried yet that morning. She hadn't needed to. Last night had stolen every tear she had left. "I can help," she said quietly, her voice almost unfamiliar in its gentleness. Liam nodded, not looking up. She stepped in her hands, shaking slightly as she fixed the tie. Her touch was light, but unsure, as if she wasn't sure if she was comforting him or herself. "There," she whispered, smoothing his collar. "You look just like him." Liam's eyes fell to the floor. A dull ache surged behind his ribs. That wasn't what he wanted to hear. Not today. Not when the mirror showed a face too hollow, too quiet, too young to carry the weight of resemblance. They drove in silence. Not even the hum of the radio. Just the soft whoosh of tires gliding over wet pavement and the occasional creak of leather as someone shifted in their seat. Liam stared out the window, the whole ride, watching the trees blur past. His fingers traced the photo in his pocket, the one he'd kept since the news came. Sergeant Daniel Cross, 42 years old, killed in the line of duty. His father, his best friend, his piano teacher, a man who could build a birdhouse with one hand and play Chopin with the other. A man who never raised his voice, who always told Liam, "Don't play it perfect, play it real." The chapel was smaller than he imagined it would be. Somehow, that hurt more. As if the space itself was too small to hold the kind of man his father had been. The coffin sat at the front, draped in the flag, red, white, blue, too bright for the gray morning. Rows of soldiers lined the side pews, stiff and silent in pressed uniforms. Their faces unreadable, but Liam saw it in the way some of their jaws clenched in the slow blinks of men trying not to cry. His mother led him by the hand, her grip tight, her steps unsure. People whispered as they walked down the aisle. Names, condolences, memories. But Liam didn't hear any of it. He only heard the echo of his father's voice from one of their late-night lessons. Even in silence, music speaks. The priest began. His words were soft, practiced distant, something about honor, about service, about sacrifice. Liam's eyes never left the coffin. He wanted to scream, to shout. Why now? Why him? But he didn't. He sat still, fists clenched in his lap, jaw locked shut. Then came the flag. 2 men in dress blues folded at each crease, deliberate, every movement as rehearsed as a ballet. When the final triangle was formed, one soldier stepped forward, placing it into his mother's arms. She broke, then silently, completely. Her knees gave her mouth open in a sob that never made it into sound. Liam held her, but his own face didn't change. Not even when the bugle played. Not even when the final salute cracked through the air like thunder in a stormless sky. Afterward, as people milled about in quiet clusters, offering hands on shoulders and murmured sympathy, Liam slipped away. He walked to the side of the chapel where a dusty upright piano rested, half covered with a linen cloth. He pulled it back. The keys were chipped. A few stuck. But he sat on the old wooden bench anyway. His fingers hovered. He didn't play. Not here. Not yet. But he remembered. The first time he'd ever touched a piano, he was 5. His father had lifted him onto the bench and said, "Pretend each note is a word. Now make a sentence." Liam had laughed and banged around until something like a tune came out. It didn't matter how it sounded. His dad clapped anyway. That was the thing about Daniel Cross. He never cared about perfection, just truth. And the truth was Liam's heart was in pieces. His mother found him sitting there a few minutes later, his fingers still resting lightly on the keys, as if waiting for permission to play. She didn't scold him, didn't tell him to come back to the car. She just walked over, knelt beside him, and whispered, "You don't have to go to the talent show tonight." But Liam shook his head. He said, "He wanted to hear me play." She blinked. "Honey, he can't." "Yes, he can," Liam said, his voice barely above a breath. It wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't defiance. It was belief. And she didn't argue. The ride home was quieter than the one there. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still lingered heavy and unmoved. Liam changed in silence. Picked out the blazer his father had once worn to his own piano recital years ago. It was too big in the shoulders, but Liam didn't care. He wore it like armor. His mother dropped him off at the school with trembling hands and a kiss on his forehead. "Are you sure?" she asked one last time. He nodded. She didn't watch him walk inside. She couldn't. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. And Liam. He entered the gymnasium, his photo tucked into his pocket, his hands shaking, his heart full of noise he didn't know how to silence. But he knew how to play, and when his name was called too early, too sudden, he didn't flinch. He stood, and the boy who had just buried his father walked onto that stage like a soldier reporting for one final order: to remember, to play, to keep his promise. The piano in their living room wasn't beautiful by any ordinary measure. The wood was faded, the legs scuffed from too many moves, and middle C had a faint buzz whenever it was pressed too hard. But to Liam it had always sounded like home. He had grown up under that sound. Even before he could walk, he remembered crawling beneath it while his father practiced. Some kids grew up with bedtime stories. Liam had lullabies on black and white keys, the kind that floated gently through cracked windows into the quiet night air. He would fall asleep to them like prayer. It was there on that bench on one sleepy Saturday afternoon where the promise was made. Liam had just turned 10. He was getting better, hitting the right notes more often than not, but he still played like a kid, uncertain, sometimes too fast, sometimes too timid. He frowned and hit the wrong chord, and his father chuckled softly. "Wrong key," Liam muttered. His father sat beside him, slid the music book aside, and leaned in close. "You know, buddy Tim," he said, "a lot of people think piano is about getting every note right. But it's not. It's about honesty. The audience doesn't need perfect. They need truth." Liam looked up confused. "But what if I mess up?" Daniel tapped the top of the piano gently. "Then you mess up. You feel it. You keep playing. You don't stop just because it hurts." Liam stared at the keys. "Even if you're really sad." Especially then. His dad had looked at him for a long moment, a look so filled with weight that Liam didn't quite understand it at the time. Not until much later. "If something ever happens to me," his father said, voice quiet, "and I can't be there to hear you play." Liam's heart squeezed even then, unsure why. "You play anyway. You play like I'm listening. Because I will be." Liam hadn't said anything, just nodded. That promise was never repeated out loud. It didn't need to be. It lived in the silence between their lessons. In the way his father closed his eyes when Liam played something beautiful. In the way he clapped loudest even when no one else did. Liam had no idea back then that the promise would someday be the only thing left. Years passed. His dad deployed more often. Each time the house got quieter. And each time he returned, there were new scars, new stories, new silences. But he still played. Even with worn fingers and tired eyes, he'd sit at the piano like it was the only place he could breathe. Sometimes in the middle of the night, Liam would wake to hear a slow, mournful melody downstairs, the sound of a man letting go of things he couldn't say with words. And in the morning, he'd always pretend nothing happened. "I was just practicing," he'd say with a smile. But Liam knew. The night before his final deployment, they played together for hours. No sheet music, no plan. Just two hearts, two sets of hands, and a language made of sound. It had rained that night, hard. Wind against the windows, thunder overhead, but inside the living room it was warm. Safe. His dad hugged him when they finished. Tight. "You're better than I ever was," he whispered into Liam's hair. "No, I'm not." Daniel leaned back, looked him in the eye. "Yes, you are." Then he placed something into Liam's hand. A tiny gold pin shaped like a grand piano, no bigger than a thumbnail. It had belonged to Daniel's father, and now it was Liam's. "Keep it with you," he said, "even when I'm gone." Liam still wore it now, tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket. He had touched it that morning after the funeral, gripped it like a lifeline. By the time he walked into the school gymnasium for the talent show, his mind was a blur. He didn't remember the decorations, the bustling students, the sound checks. Only fragments remained. A voice asking for his name. Another student bumping into him and not saying sorry. A clipboard shoved in his hands. And then, too soon, his name was called. He barely remembered sitting down at the piano, but his fingers remembered. The keys welcomed him like old friends. The touch familiar. The weight of the ivory under his fingertips like an old coat rediscovered in winter. And when he began to play, he wasn't playing to win. He was keeping his promise. Every note was a thread stitching together moments of joy and sorrow. The first song his father ever taught him. The melody they wrote together one summer. The song his dad once called Ours. And beneath it all was the quiet echo of his father's voice. "Even when I'm gone, play like I'm listening." So, Liam did. He poured everything into the music. The silence at breakfast, the crack of the gun salute, the photo in his pocket, the way the coffin looked too small for the man who once lifted him onto his shoulders like he weighed nothing. It wasn't just a performance. It was a release. Grief doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it creeps in like smoke-thin invisible choking, and as Liam played, the smoke lifted. Not completely, but enough to see through, enough to breathe. And when the final note faded and he walked off stage without a bow, without applause, without acknowledgement, he wasn't running away. He had already done what he came to do. He had kept the promise. And even in that silence that followed, he knew. Somewhere, his father had heard him. "You're up in 5, kid. Don't fall asleep on us." said a voice too loud and too casual as if it were any other school night. Liam didn't look up. He sat alone on a folding chair near the gymnasium exit, the metal cold against his back, his fingers interlaced tightly in his lap. The air behind the stage was a mix of perfume, sweat, and cheap cologne. Kids moved in clusters, some pacing, some rehearsing the way they'd enter or exit the stage like they were about to perform on Broadway. To Liam, it all felt 1,000 miles away. A girl in a glittering dress giggled behind a curtain as she practiced her routine. A boy with spiked hair tuned his electric guitar with far more flair than talent. One kid spun in circles doing karate kicks. Another one walked past Liam and paused, frowning. "Dude," he muttered. "Did someone forget the funeral was last week?" Liam said nothing. He didn't flinch. He'd already used up everything inside of him that morning. Now he was just conserving breath, conserving strength, conserving what tiny reserve of music he had left in his chest. From across the hall, one of the teachers, Mrs. Kellerman, caught sight of him and furrowed her brow. She walked over slowly, her heels clicking on the gym floor, her clipboard pressed tightly to her chest. "Liam," she asked softly, crouching down beside him, "are you okay?" He looked up at her. Her eyes were kind, too kind, and that alone almost shattered him. He forced a nod, but it was barely more than a blink. I wanted to be sure," she said. "You don't have to do this tonight. No one would think less of you." He opened his mouth. No sound came. She waited a moment, then gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "All right, just do what you feel in your heart. That's more than enough." He nodded again. She stood and stepped back into the sea of chattering voices and glittery costumes. Gone just like that. And Liam was alone again. He reached into his blazer, feeling for the worn photograph. He didn't pull it out. Just touched it. That was enough. A different voice barked from a clipboard by the curtain. "Liam Cross, you're next. Be ready." Liam rose slowly. As he stood, he saw them 3 boys off to the side. Seniors, confident, loud. They wore matching button-down shirts and stood in a triangle laughing about something Liam didn't catch. One of them, tall and wiry with a smirk that belonged on a billboard, nudged the others and nodded toward Liam. "You sure piano kid's gonna keep anyone awake," he said. "I mean, look at him." The others laughed. "He looks like he just walked out of a horror movie. Bet he's gonna play chopsticks and cry." Liam turned away. It didn't sting. Not really. Because nothing they could say would come close to what was already inside him. They were just noise. Harmless, temporary noise. And he had learned painfully and completely how to live inside silence. A girl walked past him wearing angel wings, brushing glitter from her face. Someone else ran by holding a magician's cape. The stagehand waved toward Liam and pointed to the edge of the curtain. "You ready?" he asked. Liam nodded once. He wasn't ready. Not really. But he never would be. That was the point. The MC's voice rang out over the microphone. "All right, next up is Liam Cross performing a piano piece of his own." No mention of what song, no introduction, just a name and an invisible weight behind it no one could possibly understand. Liam stepped up behind the curtain. The lights from the stage bled in through the edges. The air was suddenly warmer, the world tighter. He waited for the act before him to finish, a short skit about a dragon, something with lots of yelling and cardboard swords. The crowd laughed, but it sounded distant, echoing through a tunnel. Then applause, then silence. The stagehand gave him a small push. "Go," he whispered. And Liam walked forward. The moment his foot hit the stage, he felt it. The pull of every eye. Some polite, some curious, some completely indifferent. He felt the warmth of the spotlight on his face, the cold of the stage beneath his shoes. It was like being submerged in something invisible, some current of tension, of expectation. A cough from the crowd. A whisper, "Is he crying?" He sat at the bench, took a breath. The wrong song began playing through the speakers, a soft jazz accompaniment that had nothing to do with what he intended to play. Someone backstage had cued the wrong track. He didn't flinch. He reached up and gently closed the piano lid over the speaker system's control panel, silencing it. Then he opened the piano again and placed the photo, now slightly curled from the humidity, just above the keys. The audience didn't see it, but it wasn't for them. He lowered his head, and everything else, every whispered insult, every sideways glance, every cough and laugh and casual cruelty that had drifted through the backstage hallways, faded. All that remained was the boy, the bench, the keys, and the promise. He placed his hands on the piano and began. The silence was awkward at first, not reverent or expectant, but jagged, confused. The kind of silence where people aren't sure whether to clap, laugh, or lean forward in judgment. The speakers had stopped. The jazzy, ill-fitting background track had died with a dull pop. Someone backstage could be heard fumbling to correct the playlist. A teacher near the side of the gym started whispering to the stage crew, motioning wildly toward the sound booth. But Liam didn't wait. He didn't need the right track, didn't want it. What he needed was what no one in the room could give him. He needed that sound, that deep, raw melody that lived only in his memory, the song without a name, the one his father played when the world had grown too quiet or too heavy, a melody that had never been recorded, never written down, only passed from father to son. Liam's hands trembled slightly, but his fingers knew the way. They remembered even when his mind couldn't form the words. The first note came soft as breath, gentle as rain falling on glass. It hovered, hung in the room like a question. Then another followed. A minor interval, delicate, uncertain, until it resolved into something richer, something older than the room itself. No tempo track, no accompaniment, just truth. The gym full of posters, pop songs, restless students fell into an unnatural stillness, because somehow everyone knew this wasn't the performance they were expecting. This was something else. Liam's eyes remained closed. Not in performance, but in preservation. The moment was too raw to see, too tender to survive with his eyes open. His fingers moved like they were chasing ghosts. Each chord curled out from the piano like smoke filling corners of the gym that had never known such sound. Not loud, not flashy, not perfect, but honest. So painfully honest, it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Somewhere in the audience, a boy with drumsticks in his lap leaned forward and forgot to breathe. A girl with glitter on her cheeks stopped recording a TikTok and lowered her phone. A teacher with a clipboard put down her pen and blinked away, something forming in the corner of her eyes. The judges sat straighter. Not because they'd heard technical brilliance. Liam was off in a few places, and there were notes that cracked like glass under pressure, but because of what rode inside each note. Loss, love, longing. One of the judges, an older man with silver hair and thick glasses, leaned toward the microphone on the table to whisper something to the others. But even his voice seemed too loud for the moment, and he stopped himself. Liam kept playing. The middle of the piece descended into lower tones, brooding, aching, the kind of notes that made your throat tighten. It wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to release. Every drop of grief he hadn't been able to cry, every word he hadn't said at the chapel that morning. Every hug he wouldn't get again. It all lived here, between sharps and flats, between pressure and silence. And then, something happened. He missed a note. It wasn't dramatic, just a small fumble, a single wrong finger falling where it shouldn't. For a fraction of a second, the entire illusion threatened to break. But instead of panicking, Liam did something unexpected. He slowed down. He let the note linger. He turned the mistake into part of the music. Bent the moment into something intentional, something human. And as he did, his breath caught in his throat and a tear slipped from his cheek, landing softly on the key below. He kept playing. Didn't wipe his face, didn't pause. He just kept playing. Somewhere near the front, a woman clasped her hands together tightly, tears in her eyes, though she didn't quite know why. A teenage boy next to her, her son, looked up at her confused, then looked back at the stage. He didn't understand what was happening, but he understood that it mattered. By the time Liam reached the final notes, something had changed in the room. No one was whispering. No one was snickering. Even the loud, smug senior boys backstage were standing still, their arms folded, expressions unreadable. And Liam, he finished not with a flourish, but with a whisper. The final note was held just barely audible until it disappeared. He didn't lift his head. He sat there for a moment, his hand still hovering over the keys, his chest rising and falling, like he'd just climbed a mountain. Then he stood. He took the photo from the piano, folded it once, twice carefully, like it was sacred. He tucked it back inside his jacket and walked away. No bow, no smile, no glance toward the audience. Just footsteps, soft and deliberate. The kind of footsteps people remember not because of their sound, but because of the silence they leave behind. The crowd didn't know what to do. There was no cheering, no whooping, no clapping right away. Just this thick collective exhale that felt like grief and beauty had wrapped themselves around the gym like a shroud. Then slowly, quietly, applause began. Not loud, not wild, but steady, soft and reverent. The kind of applause given not to a child who performed a song, but to a soul who had survived one. Backstage, the stagehand who dismissed him earlier stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. The smug seniors no longer laughed. The girl with the angel wings wiped under her eyes with her sleeve. And Mrs. Kellerman, the teacher who had tried to stop him earlier, stood alone at the side of the stage, her clipboard forgotten on the ground. She watched Liam walk off toward the hallway and whispered, not to anyone in particular, "I've never seen anything like that." And she hadn't. No one had. Because what Liam brought to that stage wasn't a performance. It was a eulogy. It was a goodbye disguised as a song. And every soul who heard it, even without knowing why, had felt the tremble of something sacred. The first notes didn't crash in. They crept, like footsteps down a hallway of memory. Like something ancient and beautiful had been gently awakened and whispered, "I'm still here." No one knew what to expect from a quiet boy in an oversized blazer, his fingers trembling above the keys. But the moment those first 3 notes spilled into the auditorium, time began to soften around the edges. Conversations paused. Breath caught. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim, surrendering their harsh glare to the warmth of something far more human. The song wasn't familiar. It wasn't the pop medley the previous act had danced to. It wasn't flashy fast or technical in the traditional sense. It was slow, haunting, so intimate it felt like eavesdropping on someone's soul. Each note Liam pressed was precise, but not perfect. There was an ache in his rhythm, a break in his timing, the kind of imperfections that made it real. His playing didn't ask for your attention, it demanded your heart without permission. A woman in the 3rd row dropped her program and didn't even notice. One of the judges shifted forward in his seat, elbows on the table, his mouth slightly open. His notes remained untouched. The pen in his hand didn't move. It couldn't, because what Liam was doing wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about telling the truth. And the truth was, he was broken. He was grieving. He was saying goodbye to the man who taught him what music meant. Not as performance, but as a language only the heart understood. He was playing to someone no longer in the room, but very much still listening. The keys absorbed his pain like sponges. High notes fluttered like bird wings trying to rise through grief. Low chords rumbled like distant thunder that never quite becomes a storm. And through it all, his face remained still, his eyes closed, his breath shallow. But his hands told everything he couldn't say aloud. In the back of the room, a custodian paused with a mop halfway to the floor, staring at the stage with a wrinkle between his brows. He'd heard 1,000 school talent shows. He'd seen students juggle, recite poetry, perform dance routines. But this wasn't talent. It was testimony, and it grew. The tension in the air spread from seat to seat like a hush being passed between friends. Even the students who had been scrolling their phones earlier now sat still. The boy with the magician's cape took it off and folded it in his lap. The girl in the glittering tutu bit her lip, eyes wide, hands folded. Liam's music wasn't just sound anymore. It was grief. It was reverence. It was sacred. And people, most of them too young to know the word for it, could feel it. That strange, holy silence that filled a room when someone bears something fragile and unrehearsed. A melody swelled into a painful crescendo, then broke. Not the kind of mistake that makes a crowd gasp, but a tremor in the rhythm, a hesitation, a single note, just a little too soft, a little too slow. For a second, it felt like the moment would shatter, but it didn't. Because instead of correcting it, Liam leaned into it. He slowed. Let the silence stretch. Turned the stumble into breath, into space, into meaning. and in that breath a tear slid down his cheek and dropped onto the white of the G key below. He didn't wipe it away. He kept playing. More tears followed. Not a flood, but a quiet, steady stream. And with each drop, the piano seemed to respond, echoing his ache, rising with him, anchoring him. The sound wasn't coming from the instrument. It was pouring from inside him, from a place deeper than sadness, deeper than memory. He was playing not to perform. He was playing to survive. And somewhere in the back of the room, a veteran sat in the shadows, with his service dog by his feet. He had come out of curiosity. Someone told him a boy at the school was the son of a soldier recently buried. The vet didn't expect much, but as he listened, something inside him broke open. He bowed his head, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he cried. By the time Liam reached the final bridge of the song, the room had stopped being a room. It had become something else. Not a school auditorium, but a cathedral of grief, of gratitude, of something eternal pressing its hand gently on everyone's chest, reminding them what it meant to feel. The music began to descend softly, slowly, like the sun lowering behind a mountain after a long, aching day. Notes faded. Keys lifted. His hands trembled once more. He pressed the final chord with the care of someone placing flowers at a grave. Held it, let it breathe, then released it. And for a long, heavy second, there was nothing. No sound, no breath. Just the ghost of a song that now lived inside everyone who heard it. Then the silence broke, but not with noise, with stillness. A deep, reverent stillness that only came after something sacred had passed through the room. No one clapped right away. No one dared. Because what Liam had just done was not a performance. It was a farewell, and applause would have felt like interruption. It was the drama teacher who moved first. She reached up almost unknowingly and touched her heart. Then the girl with the angel wings let out a soft sob. A boy whispered, "Wow," and didn't realize he'd spoken aloud. Finally, like the softest wave on a glassy shore, hands began to come together. Gently. Not as celebration, but as thanks. Not a single person asked why the boy was crying when he walked onto the stage. But now none of them would forget that he had. The applause never quite reached full volume. It rose hesitantly, like everyone feared clapping too hard would wake them from something sacred. Even the MC, a normally boisterous senior, known for corny jokes and awkward transitions, stood frozen backstage, one hand still holding the next cue card, the other hovering near the mic stand. He didn't read it. He couldn't. Because Liam's performance had left something thick in the air. Not just emotion, but presence. A feeling like something had entered the room and hadn't yet left. Liam had. He was already gone. No one saw him step down from the stage. No one noticed him vanish behind the curtain. It was as if the boy had carried the music with him, left only a ghost of it behind, still humming in the bones of the room. Backstage whispers began to swirl. Was he crying before he played? I thought he was sick. Did you see what he put on the piano? Yeah, it was a photo, right? The questions came soft and scattered like leaves falling out of a tree. No one had answers. Not even the teachers, who began exchanging glances that hovered between admiration and confusion. One leaned over to the other saying, "That wasn't just grief. That was something ancient." Another muttered, "That boy. Something happened. I can feel it." Mrs. Kellerman, still holding her clipboard like a shield, finally broke her silence. "I saw him this morning," she whispered. "He didn't speak. Just looked like something was missing from him." She turned slowly to the principal, Mr. Harland, who had arrived just minutes after Liam began playing. He'd missed the funeral, unaware that the service had happened that same morning. But now he stared at the stage with haunted eyes. He spoke softly, as though afraid to disturb the lingering silence. "Someone find out what happened, please." The girl with the angel wings, whose name was Mari, walked over to a younger boy sitting near the wings of the curtain. "You know him, right? Liam Cross." The boy nodded. "Why was he crying?" He hesitated. His mouth closed, then opened again. "My mom works at the chapel on Pine Street," he said. "She told me the funeral this morning, the soldier who passed." Mari leaned in. It was his dad. It didn't need to be shouted. The words moved on their own like wind through cracks in the wall. Within minutes it spread. From student to teacher, from parent to judge, from whisper to revelation. His father died. The funeral was this morning, and he still came. The wave of realization crashed quietly, but its impact was immeasurable. One of the judges sat back in her chair and covered her mouth. The older man with glasses blinked furiously and removed them, rubbing his eyes. Even the backstage tech crew, teenagers usually unmoved by anything that didn't involve sound levels or mic feedback, stood still, their heads bowed slightly as if realizing they'd witnessed something far beyond school theater. Mari whispered, "He played after burying his dad." No one answered, because there was nothing to say. In the audience, parents who'd been checking watches or scrolling phones now felt ashamed. They remembered the boy's hunched shoulders, the slow walk to the bench, the way he didn't bow, didn't smile, didn't soak up the spotlight. They hadn't clapped at first, not because it wasn't good, but because they didn't understand it. Now they did, and suddenly it all made sense. The trembling hands, the tear-streaked cheeks, the photograph, the mistakes that weren't mistakes but echoes of grief held together by love and memory. It wasn't just a song, it was a eulogy. And the boy hadn't come to compete. He came to speak to someone no longer breathing, to reach past the veil of death and say the only goodbye he knew how to give with music. The murmurs reached the hallway where Liam had wandered, his fingers still faintly tingling from the last note. He didn't know the truth was unraveling behind him. He didn't know the school was beginning to see. He just sat on the floor beside the vending machine, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the small gold piano pin in his palm. His dad's. His. It shimmered under the hallway light. The double doors at the end of the corridor creaked open. A figure stepped in, Mr. Harland. The principal didn't speak immediately. He approached with the kind of reverence usually reserved for entering a church. He didn't want to scare the boy. He didn't want to break the fragile quiet that surrounded him like a shell. He sat down beside Liam, the silence stretching between them. "I didn't know," he said finally. Liam didn't respond. "I should have, but I didn't." Still no answer. Just the faint click of the pin being turned slowly between Liam's fingers. Mr. Harland folded his hands in his lap. "That song, I've never heard anything like it." "It wasn't something you learned from school." Liam's voice came so quietly the principal almost missed it. "I didn't. Your father." Liam nodded once. A pause. Mr. Harland stared ahead. "It was beautiful, and heartbreaking, and brave. I want you to know that." Liam blinked down at the pin. "He taught me that music isn't for clapping," he said softly. "It's for remembering." The principal swallowed. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, heavier, like it was straining to hold something too sacred. "I'll make sure everyone knows," he said gently. Liam shook his head. "I didn't do it for them." "I know." They sat in silence a while longer. Then, without another word, Mr. Harland stood and walked back down the hall. But before turning the corner, he looked back. Liam was still sitting there, still holding the pin. But this time, his shoulders were just a little straighter. The following morning, the gymnasium still smelled faintly of glitter hairspray and cheap stage smoke, but the energy had shifted. It wasn't just another Monday. It was the day after that performance. And somehow it felt like the building itself had absorbed what happened the night before. Its walls quieter, its halls softer, its ceilings higher, as if they too had listened. Liam didn't come to school. No one expected him to. But his presence was everywhere. In the way students walked slower past the auditorium doors. In the way teachers stopped whispering and simply stood in silence. In the small shrines forming at his locker notes, folded in half, a rose tucked into the vents, a piano key charm dangling from a string of yarn. In the front office, Principal Harland sat behind his desk. The sleeves of his dress shirt rolled to the elbows, a lukewarm coffee untouched beside him. He'd been there early, earlier than usual. He had barely slept, because something about the night before wouldn't leave him alone. That music, that boy, the photograph, and the funeral. He kept thinking about how many times they'd sent reminders about the talent show over the intercom, how many flyers had been posted on walls, how many permission slips collected, but not once had anyone stopped to ask what Liam was carrying behind those tired eyes. It haunted him. So he picked up the phone. Not the intercom, not an email, a real call, first to the local paper, then to the school district's media office. Then, with trembling fingers, to a friend of his, a journalist turned editor for the state's largest newspaper. The kind of man who'd covered major scandals and gubernatorial races, not school talent shows. But Harlan's voice had weight behind it that morning. "This wasn't a performance," he said. "It was a child pouring his soul out hours after burying his father." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Send me everything you have, the recording, the background. I'll be there by noon." And just like that, a ripple began to form. It started small. Someone on staff had recorded Liam's performance on their phone. They hadn't meant to post it. They'd only meant to share it with a friend who missed the event. But now, with permission, they uploaded the video to the school's website and linked it in the article the local paper ran online. The headline was simple: "Boy performs at talent show hours after his father's funeral leaves school in tears." By lunchtime, the article had been shared 2,000 times. By dinner, 10,000. By midnight, over 200,000 views on the video and climbing. Comments poured in from every corner of the country. "I'm a Marine vet. I haven't cried in years. That boy broke me. This is the most beautiful, painful thing I've ever heard. That song, it wasn't a performance. It was resurrection." And nestled in all the comments were the same questions again and again. Who is he? Where did he learn to play like that? Why didn't anyone stop the funeral from becoming a footnote to this? But it was the last question that lingered. How did no one know? At school the next day, the staff gathered in the break room like it was a chapel. Teachers who had taught Liam since kindergarten now sat with their faces in their hands, struggling to piece together the guilt curling inside them. Mrs. Kellerman spoke first, her voice hollow. "I asked him if he was okay." No one responded. "I asked him," she said again louder, "and he nodded. I thought that meant yes." The choir director shook his head. "I saw him backstage. He looked like he couldn't even stand. I thought maybe he was nervous. I didn't know he'd just buried his dad. And yet he played," someone else whispered. "My God, he played." It was the janitor, Mr. Robert, a man who rarely spoke in staff meetings, who finally broke the silence. "He didn't play for us," he said quietly. "That's what you don't get. He didn't need us to know. He just needed to keep a promise." The room fell still. At that moment the door opened, and Liam's mother stood there uncertain. Her hand clasped tightly around a folded paper. The room rose to their feet. Principal Harlan stepped forward gently. "Mrs. Cross," he said, voice softer than usual. "You didn't have to come in." She nodded, eyes tired but clear. "I know." He motioned to the chair beside her, but she shook her head. "I just wanted to bring this," she said, handing him the paper. It was a handwritten letter, the ink smeared slightly. The paper creased at the edges, but the signature at the bottom was unmistakable. "Liam." Harlan read the first few lines, then glanced up. "Do you mind if I—" She nodded, so he read it aloud. "Dear Mr. Harlan, thank you for letting me play. I know it was a talent show and not a place for whatever that was, but it was important to me. I didn't get to say goodbye at the funeral, not the way I wanted, so I said it the only way I knew how. My dad always told me that when you don't have the right words, music can carry them for you. I didn't play because I wanted to win. I played because I needed to remember. Thank you for letting me do that. Sincerely, Liam." The room was quiet. There were no questions, no corrections, only reverence. Outside, students still whispered in hallways, not out of gossip, but out of awe, out of sorrow, out of realization. One student, Mary, carried a small bouquet of wildflowers to Liam's locker and taped a note to it. "Your music changed me. I will never forget it." Another student folded a piece of sheet music with the title, "To the One Who Played Through Pain," and slipped it through the locker's vent. And far away, miles and miles beyond that school, thousands of people listened to a boy's trembling hands speak a language their own hearts understood. They didn't know his full name, but they knew the sound, and it stayed with them. It started like most things do in the digital age, quiet, almost forgettable. The video was just 3 minutes and 47 seconds long, shaky, framed slightly off-center, shot from the 4th row by a math teacher named Ms. Ortega, who wasn't planning to capture anything historic. She simply pressed record because she knew Liam was quiet, and quiet kids deserve to be seen. She hadn't even watched the full thing afterward. Not until the whispers started. Not until she overheard someone in the hallway say, "Did you hear his dad died that morning?" She uploaded it late Sunday evening, sitting alone at her kitchen table, her tea gone cold. The title was modest. No clickbait, no embellishment. Liam Cross, talent show performance, Feb 11th. She didn't expect anything from it. She didn't even share the link widely. But by Monday morning, it had passed 30,000 views. By Tuesday afternoon, it had crossed 1 million. Because something in the music refused to be ignored. People didn't scroll past it. They paused. They watched. They rewound. And when the video ended, they sat there stunned, trying to explain to themselves why a child's unpolished performance had left them shaken to their core. The truth was, it wasn't polished. It was real. And the world, starved of sincerity, recognized it instantly. It began appearing on timelines with captions like, "I don't know who this boy is, but he just made me cry at my desk. This is grief. This is love. This is music. My son died last year. This song brought him back to me for 3 minutes." From there, it spread further. A music professor from Juilliard reposted it with a full thread about emotional timing, calling Liam's choices instinctively brilliant and emotionally transcendent. A Grammy-winning composer shared it with a caption, "I have nothing to teach this boy. He already knows what matters." Military circles found it next. A retired colonel scrolling in the early hours of the morning paused when he saw the still frame. Liam sitting at the piano, a small photo above the keys, his shoulders hunched like the weight of the song had folded him in half. The colonel watched it, then watched it again, then shared it with his fellow veterans, adding just one sentence. He buried his father that morning and still kept his promise. The video made its way to a Gold Star Mothers Support Group, then to international news outlets, then to a nationally syndicated morning show that aired the full performance without commentary. Just a fade in, then silence, as the anchors struggled to compose themselves afterward. And all this happened while Liam stayed home. He didn't know about the millions of views. He wasn't scrolling TikTok or Twitter. His phone was off. His mother kept the blinds half closed. They spent the day cleaning out Daniel's closet, an act that felt more like surgery than tidying. Every folded shirt a wound, every worn boot a memory. In the afternoon, he sat at the piano in the corner of the living room. The same bench, the same chipped wood. But the keys didn't move. He just stared at them, his hands resting in his lap. "You don't have to play today," his mother said gently. He shook his head. "It's not that." "Then what is it?" "I don't know who I am without him listening." She walked over, knelt beside him, and placed her palm on his hand. "He's still listening," she whispered. "Just not from a chair anymore." Later that night, his mother's phone buzzed. Once, twice, then in a flood. She opened her inbox to find dozens, hundreds of messages. "Is this your son? We'd like to interview Liam for a segment. Our symphony wants to invite him to perform. Please tell him, his music saved me." She read them slowly, tears rising with each line. She brought the phone to Liam and placed it on the piano lid without saying a word. He looked at the screen, then at her. "What is all this? People," she said. "From everywhere. I didn't do it for them." "I know," she whispered. "But they needed it." One message in particular stood out. It came from a young woman named Evelyn, a concert pianist based in New York. She had lost her father in a car crash 6 months earlier and hadn't been able to touch a piano since. She wrote, "I've performed in front of thousands on the finest stages, but I never really played until I watched you. Your hands reminded me what music is for. Thank you for reminding me how to feel." Liam sat still for a long time. Then quietly he opened the piano lid and played, just a single note, then another, soft, fragile, like knocking on a door he wasn't sure would open. His mother sat on the couch, silent, eyes closed. He didn't know that cameras would soon be at their door, or that letters would arrive from soldiers, musicians, children, strangers. He didn't know that his song would be played on the radio during a national moment of silence next month. He didn't know about the scholarship being named after his father, or the music program being renamed in honor of the performance that changed a school forever. All he knew in that moment was that the piano was still there, and that someone, somewhere, was still listening. The lights were dimmed before the crowd even entered. Rows of folding chairs lined the polished gym floor, facing a makeshift stage at the far end. Where banners once hung from basketball hoops and pop music blasted during pep rallies, now there was only stillness lit by soft amber spotlights that bathed the space in quiet reverence. In the center of the stage stood a single object, a grand piano, black and gleaming, borrowed from the city's conservatory, and transported with careful hands that understood it would not be touched tonight. It would be honored. It had been 2 weeks since the video went viral. 2 weeks since the world had paused to listen to a boy whose name they hadn't known before, who had never asked to be seen. 2 weeks since an auditorium full of students and teachers and parents realized that they had witnessed something sacred, not just grief, but the quiet bravery of a child keeping a promise. And now they were gathering again. Not for a concert, not for spectacle, but for something deeper, a tribute. They called it the final note. Principal Harlan stepped to the podium just before the evening began. He wore a dark suit and no tie. The sleeves of his shirt rolled gently as if formality could not match the gravity of the moment. He looked out over the crowd, students, parents, strangers from out of town, musicians, veterans. Even the mayor sat quietly in the third row, hands folded over his knees. But it was the front row that mattered most. There sat Liam. Beside him, his mother wearing the same navy dress she had worn the morning of her husband's funeral. Between them sat an empty seat draped in Daniel Cross's army jacket. The spotlight did not shine on the podium. It waited patiently on the piano. Harlan cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice didn't fill the gym. It settled gently over the crowd like dust from a memory. I could stand here and tell you all what happened 2 weeks ago, but I think by now the world already knows. A soft ripple of nods. Some eyes already glistened. What I can tell you, he continued, is that I've worked in education for over 20 years. I've seen children dazzle with talent, stun with intellect, rise with leadership. But I have never seen a moment of such pure courage, such quiet defiance as the moment Liam Cross sat at this piano and said goodbye, with nothing but music. He paused, the emotion tugging visibly at his throat. And tonight we're not here to mourn. We're here to bear witness once more. This time not to loss, but to love. To the kind that lives in the notes between silence. To the kind that doesn't fade when a song ends. He turned toward Liam and gave a small nod. No announcement, no thunderous applause. Just the soft sound of a boy rising to his feet, the hem of his jacket brushing against the wooden floor as he made his way to the bench. Liam walked with more presence now. Not heavier, not lighter, but grounded, rooted. He carried nothing in his hands, no sheet music, no nerves, just something inside him, steady and unspoken. The crowd leaned in as he sat. The stage light framed him in soft gold. He looked down at the keys, then paused. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small, folded photograph. He placed it gently above the keys. The same photograph. The one with his father's smiling hand on his son's shoulder. A moment frozen in time. A silent blessing. He pressed his hands to his lap, took one breath, then began. The first note echoed like a candle being lit. It was the same melody, but not the same boy. This time he wasn't playing through pain. He was playing from it. The grief was still there, woven into the sound, but it had changed color. It no longer crushed his shoulders. Now it lived in the warmth of his chords, in the depth of his harmonies. It guided him, not haunted him. And the room, it listened. You could hear it in the breathlessness of the crowd, in the way no one shifted in their seat, in the way tears fell quietly. Not from sorrow, but from the beauty of a soul reclaiming its voice. The music swelled, not loud, but deep. Like waves returning to the shore having gone far out to sea. A girl in the back row clutched her mother's hand. A boy removed his baseball cap and held it to his chest. A veteran stood up slowly, saluting not with stiffness but with trembling reverence. Liam's hands moved with new confidence. Every note intentional, every silence purposeful. When he reached the final passage, the one he'd nearly broken through that first night, he did not stumble. He soared, and as the last note rang out soft as a father's whisper in the dark, he lifted his hands from the keys, let the silence breathe, then turned his head just slightly to the empty chair in the front row and smiled. This time he did not walk off stage right away. He stood, faced the crowd, and bowed. The applause that followed did not erupt. It rose like sunlight, like water over stone, like something ancient and grateful and very much alive. It was not wild. It was not thunderous. It was profound. And for the first time, Liam didn't run from it. He walked back to his seat, sat beside his mother, and reached over to rest his hand gently on his father's jacket. The mayor rose to speak next, but no one would remember what he said, because the night belonged to Liam. To the boy who had played a farewell when no one knew what he had lost. To the son who turned sorrow into sound. To the child who reminded a world moving too fast that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that simply plays through tears. Sometimes the most powerful voice isn't the one that shouts, but the one that plays through pain. Liam didn't ask for a spotlight. He didn't want applause. All he wanted was to keep a promise, to let his father hear one last song. Through his trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, he taught us that courage isn't loud. It's quiet. It shows up in the silence after a funeral. It sits at a piano when grief is too heavy to bear, and it chooses love over fear even when no one is watching. His music became more than a melody. It became a movement, a reminder that we don't have to be whole to create beauty. That our wounds, when shared with truth, can become bridges of connection. Liam showed the world that honoring those we've lost doesn't come from forgetting pain, but from embracing it with open hands. So to anyone carrying sorrow today, don't silence your story. Let it speak. Let it play, because someone somewhere needs to hear your note. And when the world doesn't understand, keep playing anyway, because the ones who matter, they're always listening.